I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. This is episode 122. Our esteemed guest today is a good friend and, frankly, a doctor that's helped me out a lot, Ed Foresman. Ed Foresman is in the area of physical therapy. He's a fitness trainer, wellness coach, innovator, and someone that I've known since high school. I'm actually best friends with Ed's younger brother, Andrew. And Ed, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here, Kyle.
I love it. It's such a cool conversation. And for our audience, real estate professionals, I will say to you, don't tune out, because it might feel like, why are we talking to a physical therapist? Why are we talking to a fitness trainer? Well, hey, there's something that's really important for you to share. I was in a really interesting spot in my life at the end of 2014 and the beginning of 2015. And I'll just take the audience back. My Calibrate crew, the person that's out there trying to calibrate and make stuff happen, you might be able to associate with the fact that every now and again, an injury will rear its ugly head, and it did for me. So here's what happened. January of 2014 through January of 2015 was the most productive season of my life, bar none, from a gross commission income standpoint, business production. My team at that time had done $60 million worth of real estate sales in 13 months. It was such a impactful period. I paid off my house in 2014 and saved up enough money to do a monster renovation, and did most of that with cash. But I got to the end of that project, Courtney and I did, where we actually had to get a loan back on our house to finish the project. We were living with family. That was stressful. And I know all of you are experiencing that right now as we're taping this in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. There's a lot of people, Ed, that are sitting at home, that are kind of not able to get out and be physical, not able to get out there, except for maybe just every now and again going and doing some exercise. And for the people that listen to this podcast, they're high producers. They may kind of intersect into that story that I just shared, where you're having the best year of your life and then everything stops, and you have this injury, or you have this situation where all of a sudden you realize you've been neglecting your physical health. And as a physical therapist, as a fitness trainer, as a wellness coach, I observed, by having worked with you one-on-one and helping me actually create a plan around getting my back fixed, and getting me into a spot where I was doing triathlons, I was playing lacrosse, I was doing all this stuff, and then I couldn't even stand up straight in December of 2014. And as the prompting of my good friend Andrew, your brother, he said, Ed helps people do this all day long. You got to go see him. And we'll talk through that story of how you helped me. But let's just talk about what you described, and I won't steal the thunder from you, of highly productive people that you see on an ongoing basis, how you help them both physically but also mentally and spiritually in your practice.
That's a great question, Kyle. So I tend to classify individuals like you, who are very high functioning, highly productive individuals. I call you kind of a corporate athlete. And the reason for that term is because you have to rely on your body to get you throughout the day, to encounter every obstacle, every scenario and situation you find yourself in. And you don't always have time to think about all the little details of how your body functions and how you're able to get from one situation to another. It's got to be reliable. And part of the issue is you get so busy, and as we kind of spoke before, we kind of went live. There's two groups that are near and dear to my heart: restaurateurs and real estate brokers or agents. Anyone involved in real estate. There was a story when I was first out of school. I had a guy who was coming to see me, and I actually recommended, I need you to go to the emergency room, because it looked like he had a skin infection called cellulitis. He was doing great with his back. And he said, but I have a closing. I've got to be there. And I said, well, this is, I think, more important. Well, he ended up going to the closing and then literally crawled across the threshold into the ER and was admitted. And so I know, you miss out on things business-wise if you're not healthy. So there's a lot of little things that you can do throughout the day, throughout your week, and implement into your life that are going to be convenient, that are going to be workable and doable, that really are going to enhance your ability to serve your clients, to serve your family, and to be with your friends, to do all the things that you want to do to the best of your ability.
For those of our avid listeners, those of our raving fans know that we're broadcast on Apple Podcasts. That may be where you're hearing us, but we're also on Spotify. I would encourage you to actually visit us over on YouTube because Ed's got a climbing wall behind him. That climbing wall is at his home. And we're actually going to demonstrate at some point here throughout the interview just some very practical, actionable steps that high producers can actually put into their daily practice and their rhythm. We won't do that right this moment, but I just wanted to share that if you're listening in, you may actually want to tune into us on YouTube to see Ed, to see myself, and actually see some of these very, very tactical things that you can implement in your day-to-day routine. So Ed, I shared with you offline before we started recording here that one of two things is happening for a real estate professional or a restaurateur or an entrepreneur. They're either in this COVID-19, this coronavirus pandemic, they're either in the best shape of their life right now or in the worst shape of their life. They're either drowning their sorrows with a bunch of beer and Girl Scout cookies and whatever. And I've been there. I've been the guy who's had too many beers. You say you have 2 beers, it's really 4 or 5. And then you've got, the pack of Girl Scout cookies. Thin Mints are my favorite. Tag-alongs are good too. It's sitting on your chest and you're just zoning out because you're depressed because something didn't happen right. And so you got that group of people, or you've got the folks that are like, I haven't had this free time in forever. And my relationships are great. I'm communicating with my spouse. I'm communicating with my kids. I'll tell you that I have worn more athleisure in the past month than I have in probably the past 15 years of my career. And I'm going on bike rides with my kids, and I'm going on trail runs where I'm running behind them and they're cycling and bringing the dog with us. So you've got this situation, and as we put this episode out on May 1st, a lot of cities and a lot of states are going to be lifting their stay-at-home orders, and the real estate business is going to be on fire. We were really, really hot in the real estate industry here in Colorado before all of this happened. And there's a lot of dormant business, Ed, that people are going to be working overtime. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, I had some deals fall out of contract. They're going to get resurrected. And I think that people are going to slip out of maybe some health that they had experienced over the past 30 to 45 days. And I want to share that's, I think, normal, and it's okay to maybe hopefully put some things into practice, into perspective. But then also let's communicate to the person who maybe feel like, look, I let some things slip because I can't go to my gym. I've got a high producer in my office that's just a high energy guy that's like, look, I'm used to getting in the gym every day at 6 a.m. My gym is closed and I'm like a caged animal at home, and he happens to be living with his in-laws right now. And speaking to that specific person that is just feeling like they're a caged animal and doesn't have their routine, what are some things that you are doing at home, because you're no longer in your routine either, that you really feel like can help break up some of the monotony, but also blow off some steam and have positive stress relief?
So I think for that person who is like a caged animal, I think number one is don't become too discouraged. I think you can easily get caught up in the thought process of, oh, but I don't have this in my life. I don't have this, not to the degree that I want it to be there. And just to not maybe set the same standard. Life is different for a lot of people right now, and that's okay. And just recognizing that because of that difference, you maybe need to set different standards for yourself just for this interim time period. And having some faith that you can get back to it when the time is right. So first of all, don't get too discouraged. Recognize that this is different. Number two, set aside some specific time each day. Guard that time. If you know that your body and your brain, your heart, your spirit need to move, need some vigorous activity, set aside time. Now, if you normally go to the gym for an hour, 2 hours a day, maybe that's not realistic. For me here at home, I have, 4 kids. They're all doing virtual learning. My wife is a teacher. She's recording stuff. I'm still doing, telehealth sessions with my clients. So I can't do as much. I'm not in my normal element. Normally, I'm used to being in the office and using certain resources that we have there to get some exercise in. I don't have all that at my disposal. So it's got to change. But, there's a lot of positives in that too. For people who are, say, runners, and they just run all the time, that is their mode of exercise. And that's totally fine. But I always encourage those folks, expose your body to different activities periodically throughout your year. It's better for your connective tissue. It's better for your joints. It's better for your overall health. You'll come back to running or whatever your chosen activity is often stronger than you were before, as long as you know the process to follow to get there, so you don't kind of fall off the wagon if you don't want to. So setting up that time, setting up space as well, geographically, maybe I kind of make a deal with my wife. This is kind of my space for the next hour. And she's like, all right, I understand, because I'm a better husband, I'm a better dad, I'm better at the things that I need to do if I get that time, if I get that space. And then I think, for folks who are feeling like a caged animal, try to get outside. We're blessed to live here in Colorado where there's plenty of sunshine most of the time. And to be able to get some sunshine, there's tremendous health benefits. So maybe your workout at the gym is doing some weights. Well, expose yourself to different tasks and things. Try to balance on a curb. I take my boys out on a little, we call it our nature run, where I'll kind of set up challenges like, hey, climb up this tree, see if you can get to that branch. Run along this curb, quickly try to balance and don't fall off. Instead of just walking along the sidewalk, hop up on, some river rock that's, in the median there. Try different things. And overall, just try to have fun. I think that's a key, because people who are very high functioning, who are used to a very specific regimen, sometimes that's what we need in order to get us to function well throughout the day. Sometimes fun doesn't factor in as much, or we kind of categorize that differently. Well, make your physical activity fun. Maybe you can throw the Frisbee around, and, you can get vigorous with something as basic and simple as that. My family, we play a family soccer game every Sunday. We go to this one park, and that's what we do. And that's kind of my quote unquote workout for the day. And we might end up doing that for an hour and a half, but have fun, change it up a little bit, get creative with what you're doing.
I love everything that you shared with us, Ed, about that, because I think what does occur when you have a routine, and if you are a gym rat, you're probably doing the same type of exercises over and over again, because frankly, it takes less mental energy to think of the new workout plan. And I know there's lots of studies, and I certainly won't comment about them. You're the expert in this arena with research of just, muscle confusion and changing things up. And we really get into these grooves or these ruts or these rhythms. You can call it a bunch of different things, but that routine has been disrupted. And the most important thing to do is say, this may be a time for your body to heal in an area that you've overworked, and have some fun in an area, because fitness should be fun. And I just think of a good suggestion, an actual practical thing for me. Springtime, I'm a lacrosse coach. I played lacrosse since I was 7 years old. And, I'm kind of mourning that. And I know my son, Henry, is mourning that loss of soccer for our daughter, Amelia, but lacrosse for Henry and I. And you just talked about soccer. So what I'll do is I'll be on the phone with earbuds, and we have a bounce back in our backyard, and I'll be talking to people hands free, and I'll be working the lacrosse, both hands. And it's funny, like all of a sudden 15 minutes, I'm out in the sun, I'm on the phone, I'm being efficient, and it's just a good repetition activity, and it's working on my skills, and it's just kind of a fun exercise. And I'm like, man, I just did 2 things there. It was awesome. It was efficient. I love that you share the corporate athlete. I'm really glad that you use that term. I actually have done a keynote speech that includes some research from the Harvard Business Review called The Making of a Corporate Athlete. And I actually surveyed my audience once where I said, has anybody heard of this before? And dead silence. No one in the room was like, I've never heard of Making of a Corporate Athlete. I was stunned. And you can Google it. I would say Google it maybe a few minutes from now, listen to this first. But Making of a Corporate Athlete was a study that was done in 2001. It's almost 20 years old now. And it really studies the fact that there is connectivity. And basically the preamble here is that companies and entrepreneurs specifically can't afford to address cognitive capabilities while ignoring their physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So the idea is, I think we all know kind of mind, body, spirit, but what they did here is they actually put it into 4 camps: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Those 4 things were really identified and how you address those. And what I experienced having therapy from you, Ed, is that I came in because I had a physical ailment. What I didn't realize is that I was dealing with some things emotionally and spiritually that I just didn't even realize. And those things, I think, without sounding hippy dippy, and I don't know all the research behind it, but I think that we have things that manifest in our physical beings that are going on emotionally and spiritually. And so I'll take the audience back to 2015. For the Calibrate person that's listening, you may have been here. I'm working on a huge construction project with my wife, Courtney. We had to move out of our house Memorial Day, 2015. We just paid off that house, had a big pot of money. I was very blessed at that period of time. I worked really, really hard. Frankly, kind of worked in overdrive for 13 months to get here. In one day, our house was literally ripped to the studs. A perfectly good, paid off house. It was my Steve Martin moment where I was like, what did I just do? If you've watched that movie, Father of the Bride, where he's like, I used to have a paid off house and now it's gone. And it was literally ripped to shreds. I'm like, we could have lived in that forever. And I knew it was progress that needed to happen to make what we love, which is this amazing retreat, having a 2-story addition on our original house. It took a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of money. That created stress. I started drinking a lot. I mean, I would say I was drinking alcohol every night, more so than was healthy. I was not in check with my spirituality. And later that year, really, really plugged into some elements of my spirit that I spoke to our audience in episode 100 with Rory Vaden, but then also one of our more recent episodes with Pastor John Snyder. And so I'm sitting there literally in your office, and I'm working on some back issues that I had between my L4 and my L5. And it's very common stuff, bulging disc, degenerating disc, bone spur. And I couldn't stand up straight. And for someone that had been an athlete for a long period of time, that was really discouraging to me. And so for that person, that corporate athlete that may have knee pain because they were a soccer player, that may have tennis elbow because they're a weekend warrior and they love playing tennis or golf, these things, making sure that you're taking care of your physical being, I think really amplify your ability to be successful in the workplace. And so let's talk through some of the things you most commonly see from people like myself that are these corporate athletes, of injuries that might, and we're not going to diagnose you here, anybody that's listening in, but we're going to talk about some of the things Ed sees, and then some of the things that he can physically show you virtually here online, of things that you can do at home to maybe help with that. And then obviously a way to connect with him if you're needing some more specific wellness coaching.
Absolutely. So, I think you bring up such a good point that our identity is oftentimes wrapped up in what we do, what we engage in, what we enjoy. So if, say, playing tennis is something that you really engage in, oftentimes there's a community around that. Your friends are there at the tennis club, maybe you're part of a league, you see them on a regular basis, you kind of get mentally geared up to play each week. And when that starts to slip away, or you can't function at that same level within that activity, it can really be damaging to your mind, your spirit. So a lot of times when someone comes to me with an injury, I don't just look at them as a back that needs to be fixed or an elbow that needs to be fixed. This is an entire organism, a complex organism, whose stresses, enjoyments, recreation, family life, all of that has to be taken into account. I can't expect someone to be doing, maybe an hour of remedial exercise on an elbow when they're crazy busy and working 60 hours a week. They have family that wants their attention. It's got to be a winnable game. And that's kind of where I come in. I can help create that. And I can also help, I think, a common defect in the rehabilitation world is we do our nice exercises, we might do some manual therapy or things and say, okay, now go ahead and start playing again. Well, there's also a lot of trepidation. Like, well, what if this happens again? How will I know if I'm doing the right thing? How will I know if I'm still good to go? Say I do this and it's sore. Does that mean I stop? If this is sore, is that a good thing? There's a lot of questions around that return to activity. Or, what do I need to do from here to get better and prevent this from happening again? So when someone comes in to see me, I think it's really important that any practitioner who's offering, rehabilitation services or any wellness coaching or fitness, if there's something wrong, I owe them 4 things the very first time I see them. Number 1, what do I think is wrong? I'm not just going to blindly agree with another practitioner maybe they've seen before. If they have MRIs or X-rays or imaging, I need to take that into account, but that doesn't define them. There's a lot more things involved there than just that picture of them at that moment in time. So what do I think is wrong? Number 2, is it fixable? And by fixable, I mean, can you get back to doing what you need to do? There's some things, based on maybe an MRI, it's never going to look the same as when, I can't make an 80-year-old spine look like a 20-year-old spine. But I can probably make that 80-year-old spine function pretty darn well. So they might feel, maybe not 20 years old, but pretty close sometimes. So how long is it going to take to fix? What does that plan look like? And I try to be very realistic. I think for you and I was like, Kyle, you're going to be working at this for maybe a year. Doesn't mean you're going to have to see me for a year, but I will be overseeing your scenario for at least a year. And if I'm doing my job correctly, when you leave this office, I don't care if you're feeling good right then. I do. But what's more important is months, years after you've worked with me, that you're still good. Then I've done my job. Okay. Number 3 is, if I expect you to engage with me in any sense for any of my services, what does that look like? I owe you an explanation. Most people walk in, they don't really know what they need. They don't know what they want. They don't know what this looks like. It's kind of foreign to a lot of people, unless you had an injury earlier on in life and you were exposed to physical therapy or rehabilitation. It can be very foreign. So I owe you an explanation of what does that look like and what can you expect from me on a visit to visit basis and long-term. What kind of follow-up am I going to give? What kind of plan? What type of prophylaxis? And then the last one is probably the most important, but what's your role as the client in this? What can you do on your own? What can you do about this situation on a day-to-day basis? Not just for the here and now, but for the future. And it's a process. I love how you kind of talked about that. If I'm giving you the same stuff to do day 1 as, 2 months from now, I'm probably missing the mark somewhere. Your body, as it's healing, is evolving as well. Your body's laying down new tissues. It needs to be continually challenged. I like to say you have to be on the edge of your ability. So I want something that's just hard enough that you have to achieve. You have to get a little bit better to meet that next mark. But then it's my job to give you the right scenario to continue pushing that edge of your ability so you continue to grow. So for anyone who's, I see a lot of spinal issues, a lot of, neck issues, disc issues in the neck, in the low back, shoulder issues, hip issues, knee. But I'd say probably more than 50% of the folks who come to see me, it's for a spinal issue. So.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that we literally slip into, pardon the pun, but you kind of just, it's not, very rarely I have found as I talk to other people, just anecdotally, but my own experience, is it like one catastrophic event that, and of course, there's going to be those things from a physical therapy standpoint. Someone gets in a horrific accident and has to be rehabilitated. That's, I think, what most people think about. But in my scenario, it was a series of things over probably a period of, I would have bet, 10 years of being a physical athlete playing lacrosse at a high level. But also, you know, jumping from heights and different things and having compression. And then what all realtors know is that in and out of a car constantly, proper posture or lack of proper posture is what I should say. And so a couple of the practical things that we're going to go through next, Ed, is just what people can do, some resources that they can do, you know, both from an exercise standpoint, but also things that they can do to help create good posture. Before we do that, I think it's a very appropriate moment to share how people might connect with you, both digitally, but then also if they feel like they want, because I know that you're doing a lot of teleconferencing right now. You're doing a lot of, because you can't maybe be hands-on literally, you are helping people work through some pain as we're all in stay-at-home orders. And so how do people get connected with you? What's your preferred method that they reach out to you, Ed?
Probably the best way to get in touch with me is either through email or through call or text. So my best email is Edward Foresman @gmail.com. And then my cell phone is 303-475-5102. I would refer you to my social media, but I'm just new in that space. I'm just getting some content out there, but hopefully that'll be a growing library of information for people to tap into. But really, I'm kind of old-fashioned. Email, cell phone, best way to get a hold of me. And I do get back to people within 24 hours.
That's awesome. And for those that are listening in, maybe driving, that's E Foresman, Foresman @gmail.com. Probably the best way to make sure that Ed can then reach out to you and connect and make sure it works best for everybody. And that social media library, we're going to be helping you with that and help create content. This is a great example of that. So Ed, something that I just read in the past year that was really, really impactful to me. Obviously the making of a corporate athlete was something we just shared. And that was a paper, a white paper, that was done by the Harvard Business Review. But the resource that I really enjoyed is a book called High Performance Habits by Brendan Bouchard. And Brendan, in that book and in several interviews I've heard after writing the book, did quite a bit of research around how often people need to get up and move. And if you're a weekend warrior, but also a road warrior, a desk jockey, if you will, what you'll find is you'll look down and you'll be like, holy cow, I've been working on this for 90 minutes. And there's a lot of really positive research around deep work and like immersing yourself in one thing and focusing. But all of a sudden you realize, like, I haven't gotten up. I feel stiff. You know, ergonomically, I'm just not right. You're out of adjustment. And Brendan, in his book, High Performance Habits, shares that the optimal that they studied is actually less than 60 minutes, more than 30 minutes. It's actually right at about 52 minutes. And Brendan sets an alarm on whenever he's working on something that 52 minutes, get up, get a break, get some water, get some exercise. So if I'm working and I'm going from meeting to meeting or showing to showing, what could I do as a high performance realtor to maybe break that up and still feel like I've got physical wellness in my day that is maybe not part of my exercise regimen?
Oh boy, how much time have we got? I mean, I've got a lot of content on this. This is something I'm really passionate about, because not everyone has 2 hours to work out during the day, but we all have these little narrow windows of time where we can adopt different things. So I totally agree with that time frame. 45 minutes is generally my guideline. And yes, everyone's got a smartphone. Everyone's got some bit of technology that they can leverage to their advantage in this area. Set an alarm, do something. So right now, as we're talking, I am not sitting in a chair. I'm sitting on the ground. Okay, that's by design. If you come into my office, you see one chair, but that's for the client who's coming in. And I'm not gonna sit in one, okay? So if you can get out of a chair as often as possible, that is fantastic. Another thing I would recommend, you gotta get on the ground daily. You gotta, so I take, when I'm rehabilitating someone who's got a spinal issue, I take what's called a developmental approach. So your body built its structure, including your discs, your bones, ligaments, core muscles, through a process. Okay, every baby goes through this, different phases, different times for each and every person, but we start on our backs. As our eyesight develops, we start to turn our heads and see things, and then we want to reach for things, so we start to roll. Okay, so you're engaging your abdominal, your core muscles as you do that. From that face down position, which is called a prone position, you start to develop muscles along your spine as you develop head control. Then once again, as you see things within your visual field, you want to reach for things. And then you start to crawl. Okay, from crawling, then you get curious and you want to see what's up here. So you go through a process of kneeling or half kneeling and pulling to stand. Then you cruise along furniture, and then you start to walk. That's a several month-long process. Okay, from my standpoint, if there's a dysfunction, you do your body a whole host of good from a neurological perspective, from a recognizable perspective from your brain. If you kind of retrace those steps, deficiencies in all of those emerge. So, you know, when we were working together, for instance, a lot of stuff we did at the beginning, you were on your back or on your stomach. Then we got you, you know, to be a bit more aggressive. You went through some kneeling stuff, remember the stuff with the ball. And then I had you doing stuff in standing to kind of finish things up. So I think in addition to getting out of your chair frequently, you know, if you're working with a laptop, set it on the ground. I'm sitting, you know, cross-legged right now. If you go to a lot of different cultures throughout the world, they will not have chairs like we have chairs. If you go to Vietnam, they're going to be in a deep squat position for cooking, going to the bathroom, eating. That's how they function. So guess what? I had an 80-year-old woman, you know, several years ago. She was from Vietnam. And I take every single person through a series of movements. And one of them is a deep squat. She could deep squat better than just about any athlete I've ever tested. It was amazing. It was like nothing to her, but it's because she had done that so frequently. So that's another thing that I highly recommend. If you're sitting in a chair, your hips, your knees are at 90 degrees, guess what? Your body gets really accustomed to that position. And when you start to want to push beyond that on a regular basis, if you have not done that in a while, you're going to be at greater risk for injury. So that's another thing. You know, so right now I just moved my laptop so I can kind of get in a different position here. Right now I'm just kind of stretching my hips, not a ton, not a stretch where I'm maximizing it or, you know, really feeling the burn, but I'm doing my hips a lot of good just getting into this position periodically. Also, a lot of the footwear that, you know, we encounter throughout the world is very cumbersome. Again, if you look at, you know, the human body, and now it's changed over, you know, thousands of years, not a lot has changed. Our feet have so many nerve endings. They're great sensors, but when they're in these, you know, blocks that we call shoes, you're not able to access the world the way you want. Leads to a lot of other problems up and down the chain. So if you're really conscious of your footwear day in, day out, making sure you actually spend time barefoot on different surfaces, you're doing your body a whole host of good. You know, I'll show you, here's my running shoe right here. Okay, I went out running, trail running in these yesterday. Now, I didn't go from wearing these cumbersome tennis shoes to this in one day. It was a process, but you know what? I function a lot better now. And I have a torn meniscus, partially torn ACL in my knee. It doesn't bother me at all. I've rehabbed my way through it, and I can run in these, and it doesn't bother me. So
for those that are listening instead of watching, obviously try to tune in on YouTube if you can, but what Ed just showed basically looks like a sandal crossed with maybe a flip-flop. Obviously got a little bit more support and attaches to the foot better, but it very looks like kind of thin, and very much looks like almost like you would imagine in biblical times what people would go running in, which is kind of like sandals.
Exactly. So I think, if you're conscious of your footwear, and I can give you links to some companies that I really like that make good footwear. But again, I wouldn't jump in if you've been wearing orthotics for years. Uh, don't jump into that full time right away. There's definitely a process that you want to follow, but it can be done. But, over time, as we mature, all those muscles in our feet, all those nerve endings, they start to really atrophy, and they need maintenance just like everything else. Most people come into me and they're confused. They didn't have an injury, just kind of like you described. It's sort of a battle of attrition, and they think, how did this happen? And one analogy I like to use is, well, you brush your teeth every day. You do that twice a day. You know how to care for your teeth. You have to know how to, quote unquote, brush your spine. You have to know how to take care of it. And it is really by exposing it to different positions, postures, movements on a daily basis, so that you get the maximum benefit and the maximum longevity out of it.
I love that. I think it's very important to share. Obviously, if you're experiencing pain, none of these things you want to jump into right away without working with someone as a wellness coach. And normally that's done one-on-one in person. Obviously, right now, probably working with some existing patients, existing clients that their physical makeup, and what gains they've made and what issues they have. And you can do some of that digitally to make sure that you can provide them encouragement from afar, Ed. But a lot of this stuff is done kind of the old-fashioned way in person. And the thing that I really appreciated about your therapy, and I focus in on the therapy because it was not only physical, it was definitely mental. Definitely helped my spirit in a time of great stress. And that stress really hurt my kind of emotional being. What I really enjoyed is that these were not long sessions. I would typically leave somewhere, and most of the way that my day was set up is I would have an appointment with Ed. It was typically at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and I would make that my appointment before I went home. I didn't know that was going to be part of the benefit, but it was really a great decompress, stress relief, and it was kind of this wonderful hidden gem, this unintended outcome. And what occurred is, in 20 minutes of working together in what you would not look at as anything crazy, Ed could make me sweat in very, very small, what seemed like very remedial types of exercises. And so I think that's worth saying too, is that you don't have to work out for 90 minutes like you were sharing, or 2 hours. A lot of times it can be done really well, really effectively with someone who knows what they're doing. And a lot of this stuff is really training your mind that your physical aspects are going to be moving differently. Because final assessment on this is, when I had that back pain and it was diagnosed by a doctor, I thought I was going to go to an orthopedic surgeon, and I was going to a neurologist. And that was really interesting to me. I'm like, why am I going to a neurologist for something that's bone related? And they're like, oh no, this is connected, obviously, your spinal cord and your brain. You want to make sure that a neurologist is seeing you. And so that was really, really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love how you spoke about how, kind of your mind changes. Your brain actually changes how it perceives an area if there's an injury. It changes how it activates muscle around there. And it's almost like it forms an internal brace. So muscles kind of, they're kind of on high alert all the time. Your body's alarm bells are constantly resounding, which elevates a lot of your stress hormones, which affects so many other things. And if you already have some angst or anxiety around an injury, if it's really affecting your life, take for instance that tennis player whose, social life is starting to drift away because they can't engage with their friends, they can't do the thing that they love, that kind of helps keep them even keel. That can contribute in an even bigger way. The impact and the response from the body is amplified in that situation. So all these small aspects have to be managed. What I can do is create a really safe environment to really improve that area. At the same time, I can give a really good and strenuous and difficult workout working on these aspects that need to be addressed, as opposed to a very general, workout program. I can kind of hone in on what specifically needs to be addressed and target those weaker areas. So part of what I try to impart to everybody is, what's your self-audit look like? This looks different for each and every person. Depends on your daily demands, depends on, everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. Everyone's body has little areas that need some maintenance. The difference between, kind of quote unquote normal people and pro athletes will come in and they'll tell me, these are where my problem areas are, and here's what I'm doing about them now. What more can I be doing? Whereas, I kind of have to uncover that a little bit more for people who aren't high level athletes. But what's your self-audit process, and what are you doing about those things? So that can look very different for each and every individual, depending on their duties, depending on their chosen activities, their life situation. But it's a very important process to have, and you can kind of revisit that on a daily basis.
Great suggestions. And a thought leader that I really appreciate is a guy by the name of John Acuff. And John has actually agreed to, I don't think I've ever shared this with the podcast audience here. I don't think I've ever shared this with you, that that John has actually agreed to be interviewed next year when he releases his new book. John had shared with me, and I've heard this in a number of different ways, that oftentimes we have the desire to go run 3 miles, go run a 5K, right? And we know that might take us 30 minutes. It might take us 35 or 25, depending on your physical abilities. And what happens is the crunch of the day, you get interrupted, and all of a sudden you realize you no longer have that 30 minutes. And so you don't go at all. And so he said, what so often happens is you assess that this type of exercise, this duration of exercise, is what's necessary. And so it's an all or nothing approach. It's a 0 or 30 minutes, instead of like, well, now I only have 15 minutes, and what can I get into this 15 minutes to get a sweat going, to get good range of movement, mobility. And I just, the other, it's not a thought leader, but just a guy that I've interviewed before, mentioned that as he was working on really losing a lot of weight and he got into a bad physical space, is like a lot of times what it is instead of thinking about, I got to run 3 miles or 4 miles or whatever, it's how can I walk the first block? How can I walk to the stop sign? And that's a victory today. And so I think for you, Ed, you may have some very practical, actionable tips for people where you just say, look, I may not know what your diagnosis is, but these are very simple, whether they're stretches or exercises or things you should be able to do, and things that maybe you can listen to your body and say, these are triggers that if all of a sudden, if this is feeling really out of whack, you need to see someone professionally. But there's someone like myself that's got some low back pain. I interview normally, not right now, but almost all of my interviews I do standing up. I try to move. I try to make big, bold steps. What are some of these physical actions that we can do, maybe as we wake up in the morning, and just things that we can do to make sure that we're limber and we're in tune with what our body is saying to us?
Great question. So I think, if we look at your day from the morning, for instance, a lot of people have a tendency, especially if there's kind of a history of back issues, they want to stretch first thing in the morning. And I would say hold off a little bit. There's reasons for that. Your tissues are different because they've been more stagnant overnight. Stretching is usually better later in the day, especially if there's an injury. Okay. I think walking is really, really therapeutic. It's good. It's very nice on your spine early in the morning. That's usually one of the first things I prescribe for people. One thing that I recommend is that is a time where, as long as their feet are functioning a bit better, you wear some kind of more minimal shoes. You kind of warm up your feet. You get in tune with how they're feeling. It gives you kind of a barometer for how the rest of your body is functioning. I think on a daily basis, what you can do is little 5-minute exercise sessions. So for instance, I've separated this shoulder 3 times, this AC joint, and this one twice. So I know if I want to keep these functioning and be able to go rock climbing with my family, I have to kind of do, some big circles. I can do these anywhere. I don't need any equipment. I've got to go around the world with these guys. And if I get in 5 repetitions each side, I'm covering my bases for how this is functioning. I'm maintaining that. That's a self-audit, okay?
And that's with no weight. It would seem like it's a fairly straightforward. I mean, you're literally going from the front of your body to the back, and you're rotating around. I mean, it's a very natural movement, and it doesn't seem like it's a huge stressful movement.
Right. I would say, I'm gonna tilt my camera here. Nice deep squat, being able to linger here for at least a couple minutes. So like I said, I've got, you know, some injuries in my left knee, but this does not bother me at all. It took me a while after that injury to create a safe scenario here, but this is something that I practice on a daily basis. I usually do this 2 to 3 times per day. I tend to do it a bit more if I'm having to sit for quite a while. A lot of times, you know, this movement here, getting into this position and leaning forward, this should be able to go over the toes the length of an iPhone. Okay, that's something that a lot of people have difficulty doing because most of the time their heel is lifted in whatever shoes. Men's and women's shoes are notorious for having kind of a lifted heel. So that's something that you can do throughout the day. Just imagine spending 1 minute doing this each side once or twice a day. That's going to help you start to limber this up. I'd also say balancing on one leg. Just do it while you're brushing your teeth. Balance on your right foot in the morning, balance on your left foot in the evening. That gets easy. Close your eyes. Okay, those are really easy things. You're already standing there brushing your teeth anyway. Why not challenge yourself? Okay, so you know, a lot of people, I'll give you a quick tip. Most people who come to me with back issues, they say, I've been stretching. I don't know why this is hurting. I stretch, feels good for a little bit. A lot of times they're kind of stretching forward, you know, doing something like this. And that's nice. But what a lot of people are afraid to do, and this is just, I think, built into us for some reason, they don't like doing this.
Right.
A lot of times this is corrective. This is really this kind of cobra pose. That can be tremendously beneficial. And I think that's something everyone should try and retain over the course of their lifetime. If a lot of, you know, if I see older people, I'd say age, you know, 70 plus, and I ask them to stand up and bend backwards, they really can't move their spine that direction.
Yeah.
Kind of, their spine is shaped like a chair because they've been sitting in a chair a lot. So retaining that ability of your spine to bend backwards is very, very healthy. So if you kind of, you know, think of, you know, when you have these little breaks, think of just what body part you might want to do. Spend 2 or 3 minutes, no more than 5, you know? So right now, as I'm talking with you, I can just do this, okay? I'm working on my hips, okay?
And Ed's moving his leg behind him and getting, again, if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing this, but all of these are very, very subtle adjustments. None of these are wild, crazy movements. And that was the thing that I learned the most about my own back is that oftentimes I was doing the hurdler stretch where you're sitting, you've got both legs in front or you've got one versus the other and you're kind of like stretching forward. And oftentimes what is observed and with both the McKenzie roll that you'd given me for lumbar support, but it just also reminds you that your back needs to have that reverse curvature that people don't often think of because they think, okay, bending forward or kind of hinging forward is really going to help me. But a lot of times, like you said, it's getting with your thighs on the ground and doing that cobra pose where you look like a cobra snake as your body is really elevating back to really clear your back.
Mm-hmm. I think one last thing I would recommend, Kyle. I had a COO from a pretty well-known tech company come to see me, and I'm kind of a no-nonsense person. I tell you exactly what I think you need to do in order to resolve the issue. And my recommendation was to do this one neck exercise every hour, every waking hour. And he said, well, I'm in meetings a lot. I just can't do that. I said, you can. Do me a favor. Before the meeting starts, I would like you to announce, hey guys, you're going to see me do this exercise every so often. It's because I have this issue. I'm working my way through it. I'm really trying to get this healed. So he did that and came back in the next time and said, you know, as soon as I said that, 2 other people in the meeting said, you know, if it's okay, I want to stand up every once in a while. It almost gives other people freedom to take care of themselves too. And I've continued to, you know, distribute that advice, and it is like gold, because there's so many people out there hurting or dealing with some physical ailment. It's almost like you saying that you're giving them permission to take care of themselves too. It's very freeing, and it actually kind of develops relationships amongst people. And it's like, yes, I'm taking care of myself. It opens up conversation. It's actually a great tool, and you take care of your own body in the process. So don't be afraid to, you know, state that when you're engaging with someone and just say, hey, I'm working on something here. I still have yet to encounter anyone who said, yeah, I couldn't do that. You know, someone said, no, please don't do that. So I think most people are pretty understanding.
Ed, it's great advice. And as we near the end of our time, as we're communicating with our corporate athlete that's listening into this conversation, I feel compelled to share something that I observed and that I've listened to. You shared that muscles oftentimes will protect our area of injury, and that's a way that, you know, the mind is telling the body, you know, this is an area that got hurt and it's protected. And in 2 recent interviews, I interviewed my therapist, my psychologist, in episode 120, Galena Rhodes. In episode 119, I interviewed on Easter weekend my pastor, John Snyder, in A Message of Hope. And what psychologists will call that manifestation physically, they'll call it a limiting belief, where your mind is doing something to protect you. And a lot of the discussion that we have at Calibrate is how people work through failure. And failure can be a couple of different things. And I really enjoyed an observation that I had is that you use the word practice as you practice something on a daily basis, because you may start here and you may grow to there, you know, using that kind of upward and to the right trajectory, which all of us want. But there's going to be some times that you stumble. There's going to be some times that it's hard. There's going to be some times that you need some intervention, some coaching. And for you, I would imagine that you deal with that failure. You deal with that daily practice a lot. I think for high performers, sometimes that can be frustrating because we're used to success. So when you're addressing failure personally, what are some things that you go through just to say, like, this didn't work out the way that I expected, or my new normal is different than I had planned? And how do you work through that?
Well, it's something I bring up on the very first visit. When I'm talking with someone, I say, you know, your expectations, I know sitting in that chair looking at me, you're probably expecting yourself to just have very linear or even exponential improvement, but that's just not reality. There will be setbacks. Life comes at you pretty fast sometimes. There's a lot of things that you can't control. In fact, probably more than you can't control than what you can. However, I've coached a lot of people through this. I know, you know, I'm realistic and what expectations I'm giving you here. We can get you here, but it's going to take some problem solving as well. Sometimes, you know, it does entail, I mean, you know, I hate to restrict activities that people engage in, especially the ones that are very important to them. Every once in a while, I'll have to have that conversation and say, you know, I just don't know that this is safe for you to engage in. But then it's, you know, it's my job to help them through that. It's almost like a, you know, a process of lamenting that loss a little bit, but it works out better if they can substitute something else. You know, if they can't play tennis, maybe they can play squash, or pickleball or something like that. There's a lot of options and opportunities that can uncover themselves when you're dealing with that sort of thing. So when it comes to failure, I don't really see anyone going through that therapeutic process as failing at any step of the way. They might not be meeting the exact mark that they expect. However, at each point in the process, there's learnings to be gleaned, learnings about themselves. You know, I remember one person, I felt really bad, like just wasn't able to get him back to playing soccer at the level he wanted to. He was, you know, kind of a mid-30s-year-old soccer player, but still playing at a very high level. And I said, you know, I just don't know at this frequency that you're going to be able to sustain this. And his response was tremendously positive. He said, you know, what I've learned about myself in the process, what I actually like now is quite a bit different. That doesn't feel like as big of a loss. And I feel like you've counseled me through that, that I can still feel healthy. I can still be me, but I'm not engaging in this as much as I was, and that's okay. So, you know, it is a very mental or spiritual acceptance, I guess, occasionally, but through that, there's a lot of learnings and there's a lot of triumph as well.
I love that. And obviously our audience, our corporate athlete that's listening in can understand why I seek physical therapy from Ed, but also along the way, a nugget, that gratuity that he provides is obviously the mental and the spiritual parts of it as well. Our last two questions really touch on that introspection, that spiritual thought of kind of where we're going. My pastor, John Snyder, when I asked him about this, he was like, oh yeah, that reminds me of the Stephen Covey, start with the end in mind. And we're going to ask a question of you that we ask every single guest. So this idea of Dear Younger Me, it comes from a song that's by the band Mercy Me. And the idea is you're writing a letter to yourself now that you've lived some life. And I say it's the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. What's that Dear Younger Me advice that you'd give to someone in their 20s as they're embarking on a career in an area of their passion?
I think, I mean, this sounds kind of cheesy, but enjoy the process, you know? Don't just look for the outcome and just being satisfied with achieving the outcome that you desire, but enjoy the process. You know, I was at an event with my wife, and she was pregnant with our first child, and there was a guy that came over, and he was just beaming from ear to ear. He was so happy for us being pregnant, and you know, he told me how he had 5 kids. I said, well, from an experienced dad to a new dad, what advice would you give? And he said, just enjoy it. And it's so true. I think there's so much delight that it doesn't have to be in the big things, you know. Some of my best memories are just, you know, from making chocolate chip cookies with my kids, as opposed to like going on a great vacation. It's just taking delight in all those little things and enjoying the process of watching them grow up through all the, you know, trials and tribulations. And but yeah, I think just take the time and take the recognition to enjoy the process.
Love that advice. Final question, and it comes from the answer that I got to that very same question from one of our very first guests. My career coach at one period of time was a guy named Chris Oakley. And Chris was interviewed in episode 5. And his answer to that question, the Dear Younger Me question, was that he was in a mentoring group in his 20s. And the group had him read a book called The Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. And there's an exercise in there where you have to actually write your own obituary. And it's an idea then again of, you know, what type of legacy do you want to leave on this world? And would you hope that if someone was delivering a eulogy about you, Ed Foresman, what would you hope, Ed, that they would say to you posthumously as they're delivering maybe your eulogy or an obituary?
Man, that's a tough one. I think, you know, obviously I'm a dedicated family guy, but you know, and that's really where, you know, my heart is most at home when I'm, especially with my wife, you know, one-on-one. Just I was a very dedicated, you know, husband and dad, and it really gave each and every person, you know, my very best. You know, I think people who I engage with, you know, and take them through the healing process, I'm kind of a perfectionist. I don't want anything to slip through my fingers. I don't want anyone to say he didn't really try his best to help me. Just that I gave each and every person the best of me, that I gave them every opportunity to succeed, whether it's my kids, my wife, or each and every client that I work with or teammate that I work with. So that's probably one of the resounding things.
That's amazing. Ed Foresman, for those that want to connect with you, again, the email is eforesman, Foresman @gmail.com. To the corporate athlete out there, we really need you to be the best version of you. And as you can tell, during this COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, we have been focusing on those things. This episode was all about your physical being, but then also making sure you're tapped into your emotional, your mental, and your spiritual. So go back and listen to episode 120 and episode 119 as you listen to Ed's episode. Connect with him. If you're dealing with some physical ailment, he can probably connect you, even if you're out of the state of Colorado, with someone that he knows that can help you. And Ed, I just really appreciate your time and your energy. I appreciate all the things you did to get to me literally back walking again, walking upright, and you're a good friend and you're a good man. So as I love to say, for Ed Foresman, our esteemed guest, and for Kayla Davis, our podcast producer, I'm Kyle Malnati, and we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks, Ed.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle.
All right, I'm excited to launch this out. It's going to take us here about a week or so just to get it edited. But Kayla's going to email you all of the different links, send it out. It's all over social. You'll see some of that, and then obviously anything you can share with friends, family. I find some of the most effective things is just, and you've seen me do this to you, is just drop a link in a text message to someone saying, "Hey, you know, if you're contemplating working with me, here's kind of my philosophy on things." And I'm really passionate about sharing your message and getting it out there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kyle. I really appreciate your time and your promotion with this. Hopefully it's what you were looking for. And
exactly what I was looking for. And what we'll do, one of the things that I'll share with you is we will send you the raw content, because then you can it's a lot easier to have someone like me interview you. And then you can say, "Oh, that's right, I always do say that." And you can just take it either with iMovie or even just on your iPhone and clip it down to 60 seconds and throw it out on Instagram and say, "Hey, this is something Kyle and I were rapping about." Or you can put it into a YouTube library. So I'll give you the raw content so you can utilize it. It's a lot easier this way.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kyle.
You're welcome. All right, man. I'll see you later. And
right,
we'll email you with all the details when it launches.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Kyle.
See you later. Bye.